My name is Sarah Reef. I am the chair of CLA's Health and Wellness Committee. And I want to start by thanking Patrick Krill and his team for conducting this very important study, which did result in some very concerning findings regarding the stress that women are experiencing in the legal profession. So seeing this impact from the study, CLA knew that we needed to take a proactive response, and we needed to reach out to stakeholders across the state and form a statewide working group to assess and address the study. So I want to thank the California women lawyers and all the participants in our statewide working group for coming together to take a proactive response. And we have a report and recommendations that we're going to go through tonight and discuss with all of you. So to start off, we are going to do a poll to see who is here tonight. Do we have law students? Do we have, new practicing lawyers? Do we have retired lawyers? So Lauren's going to launch a poll. And while you're answering that, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. So we are recording tonight. So attendees are asked to please stay on mute. We will have the chat enabled and available for use. So we will put some prompts in there for you to answer. And we do plan on taking questions at the end of the presentation. So if you would please submit your questions through the Q&A function on your Zoom window, I will address those at the end. Automatically generated captions are available this evening, so you may use those through your Zoom toolbar to turn on captions if desired. So it looks like we've got mostly folks that are licensed lawyers with 6 to 15 years of experience. Looks like all lawyers on the call, some very experienced lawyers as well, and some new folks. So thank you for joining us. Now we know who's here. All right. So as we get started, I wanted to ask the attendees, and this is something that's going to go in the chat. Why are you joining us tonight? And what do you hope to take away? So we've got Lauren has put that prompt in the chat. So if you would take some time to answer that, it would help us gain some perspective on why you're here tonight with us. All right, so we are going to start off our town hall with Patrick Krill and Bree Buchanan. They are both experts and leading authorities in mental health and well-being in the legal profession. Patrick, as I noted, is the researcher and author of the study we are focusing on tonight. And Bree was our work group leader and co-author of the report and recommendations. I cannot thank both of you enough for the work that you do in this field and with CLA. So welcome and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Delighted to be here.
So Patrick is going to do a little summary of his study and findings that brings us here this evening.
Sure. So just to kind of give you a quick overview of this project, of the research that this report and this work group was based on, I'll step back and just provide you with an understanding of how this research came to be. I'm someone who's been researching various elements and aspects of lawyer mental health and well-being for a number of years, but most of the available data that were out there pertain to prevalence, right? What is the prevalence of depression? What is the prevalence of hazardous drinking? What is the prevalence of anxiety, et cetera? And there was very little or essentially no research that helped us go upstream and to really identify and understand what was behind many of the challenges that we knew existed in the legal profession, right? To hopefully unlock some solutions once we understand better what's causing, what are sort of the mechanisms that are causing the problems that we confront. And so together with a colleague of mine at the University of Minnesota Medical School, I reached out to a couple of bar associations or, lawyer professional associations that I thought well of and had relationships with, including the CLA in the DC bar, because I knew that they would want to or be interested in taking a leadership position and helping us gain some additional insight into the challenges that the entire profession is facing. In addition, California and DC are also two of the largest lawyer populations in the US. So we knew that we'd have a large, very sort of robust data set and sample, and it would also be bi-coastal in nature. And so ultimately what we did was develop a very lengthy research assessment, research instrument survey that was administered to lawyers in California and DC back in 2020. And it allowed us to gather a significant amount of data, which has now resulted in the publication of 3 peer-reviewed studies over the last 24 months, which examine various angles and sort of aspects of what is truly a lawyer well-being and mental health crisis. And this first paper reports on the gender-specific differences, right? Which is obviously why this work group was formed and why this report was generated. I'll just tell you at a high level some of the big picture takeaways from this paper, which was titled Stress, Drink, Leave, an examination of gender-specific risk factors for mental health problems and attrition. It's kind of a mouthful, really, but basically what we were trying to identify is what were the gender-specific differences, and again, to gain some insight that will hopefully lead to solutions. We found that there is clearly an ongoing well-being crisis in the legal profession with levels of depression and anxiety that were quite high and clearly worsened by the stress associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. So to be clear, depression, anxiety, hazardous drinking, stress, thoughts of leaving the profession are high across the board, but they are notably higher for women. And that was, not necessarily something we were expecting to see going into this research project. But when we began examining the data, it was so clear to us, there was this very clear trend line through everything, that women appeared to be sort of situated in a worse position. I'll just put it that way, in terms of their mental health and their drinking. And so we thought it would be appropriate, necessary, important to make the first paper that we reported on these gender-specific findings. Women had higher levels of depression, higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of stress. They were more likely to report that they were thinking of leaving the profession due specifically to mental health burnout or stress. So at the time, 1 in 4 women reported that they were thinking of leaving their profession due to mental health burnout or stress, compared to 17% of men. Beyond that, though, back to that point I was making about wanting to go upstream, we identified predictors, right? So it's sort of a term in a statistical sense, what things predict these symptoms or these problems emerging in the study population. And for women, as it relates to thoughts of attrition, right? Because that 1 in 4 thinking of leaving, really, truly problematic. We saw that work-family conflict was the #1 predictor of women saying, I'm thinking of leaving. Now, a point that I want to make on that, which may not have been overly apparent when reading the paper, work-family conflict, that term, it's a little bit deceptive because the instrument that we use to measure that, a standardized assessment, asks about conflict with sort of personal life as well. So it's not necessarily strictly family, but it really is someone's personal life, which very much could include their ability to undertake and navigate familial obligations. But it could also just be sort of an ability to have a personal life that's not infringed upon. So that was the #1 predictor of thinking of leaving for women. But there were other problems that were pretty notable as well. We found that in terms of problem drinking, which was really high for men and women, women drinking more hazardously than men. Stress associated with the pandemic was the #1 predictor of whether someone was drinking hazardously. Now, some of those circumstances have changed. Some of the stress associated with the pandemic has abated. For other people, maybe it hasn't fully, but that was sort of a dynamic factor. And we would hope that as the stress associated with the pandemic sort of does abate or evaporate, that people may return to some healthier lifestyle choices. But what we did see was a high level of sort of maladaptive coping, if you will, turning to alcohol to deal with that stress, which to me suggests we need to really enhance the amount of tools that lawyers have at their disposal to cope with stress and not just turning to self-medication. But beyond that, a specific point that I want to make about the hazardous drinking that emerged from this research, we saw that workplace permissiveness was the #2 predictor of whether someone would have an alcohol use problem, right? Workplace permissiveness is essentially what's the work environment, what's the culture in your workplace as it relates to drinking. Is it overly permissive? Is there a lot of sort of drinking that goes along with the job? And that is clearly tied to lawyers likelihood, susceptibility, vulnerability to developing an alcohol use disorder. So that's actionable, right? And we need to sort of lean into that and work to change cultures to address that. Another point that I wanted to make, there was a question that was submitted in advance, a good and an important question, whether we looked at the data through the lens of age and race. We did report on age, on the age element, because we had robust data on that. And we saw that younger lawyers were experiencing higher levels of depression, anxiety, stress, et cetera, which is very consistent with my prior research and other prior research. So age was certainly a factor. We did not report on racial differences or disparities because the sample size was not large enough of non-white attorneys to, offer reliable, statistically reliable findings from that point, right? So we would have needed to design the survey differently to have a larger sample size of non-white attorneys. So we didn't have reliable data there. The age was very much a factor. I'm probably leaving some other things out, but those are sort of the high level findings. I want to now invite Bree to offer her perspective and talk to you a little bit about the report and its generation.
Sure. And so clearly this was incredibly important information to provide. So both CLA and the California Women Lawyers came together and wanted to develop a report, and they asked us to take the lead on that. So the first thing we started to do was to gather a diverse group of members of the profession in California, women lawyers and women ally lawyers, who would come together, review the report, and really take a close look and see what does this mean for women lawyers in California, for the profession, and what should we be doing about it. So at the end of 2021, we started putting that together. We've developed ultimately a working group of 13 members. We were looking at geographic diversity and affinity bar diversity. We had a couple of members from the judiciary as well as from law school faculty. So we had a really great group. We spent 4 months reviewing it and deciding what we wanted to do. And we really knew there's a lot of data here, but we wanted to make sure that people read it and grasped it, and that it was something that was really going to be a tool towards making a difference. And so we did an overview of the study, but we quickly got into making recommendations. Then these recommendations are the work product, I suppose, of the work group that came together. And so you'll hear more about what those recommendations are. And then once we had that developed, we had our writing team come together, myself and Katia and Jody, and we hit the ground running. And here we are today.
Great. Thank you, Patrick and Bree. I'm going to hand it over now to Jody Kleestaddle. She is going to give us a summary of the report. Lauren is also going to drop a link to that report in the chat as well. Jody.
Hi, thank you all for joining us tonight. I was pleased to be part of the work group looking at this study, and thank you, Patrick, for all the work you did and research. To explain a little bit more in slightly more detail some of the findings that Patrick mentioned. He mentioned that about 1/4 of the women surveyed, 24.2%, indicated that they had contemplated leaving the profession due to mental health problems, burnout, or stress, which was significantly greater than the proportion of men who contemplated leaving, which was only 17.4%. The study had looked at the predictors that Patrick mentioned, and those predictors included effort reward imbalance, which means an imbalance between the effort you put into your meeting your job demands compared to the rewards you receive. Work overcommitment, which I think we all can relate to, the sense of exhaustion and being overwhelmed by work demands. Likelihood of promotion, which would be a positive correlator, the perceived prospects for promotion at work. Work-family conflict, the degree to which work interfered with family life. And then the workplace permissiveness toward alcohol. In our paper, we didn't look at so much at the drinking aspects of the study as the general women contemplating leaving the profession. But the study did find that women had significantly higher scores than men for the effort reward imbalance, reflecting that they felt they needed to put in greater effort to get the same reward, overcommitment, reflecting greater exhaustion, and work family conflict, reflecting greater interference of work with family obligations, whereas men scored higher than women on the perceived likelihood of promotion. The work family conflict was the factor most predictive of contemplating leaving the legal profession for women. Women who had a high work family conflict score were roughly 4.5 times more likely to leave or consider leaving the profession due to mental health, burnout, or stress. And it was a significant factor for men too. Sorry, my lights go out if I don't move around enough. Work family conflict, was a significant factor for men too, but just not as high as for women. And interestingly, this was true even though the men surveyed were more likely to be married with children than the women surveyed in terms of, who the survey respondents were. Work over commitment was strongly associated with stress, and all the lawyers surveyed, with the strongest relationship being in women. But women were actually slightly less likely than men to leave the profession based on that factor. For those experiencing high work over commitment, men were more than twice as likely to contemplate leaving the profession due to mental health, burnout, or stress, with women following close behind it, being 1.78 times more likely to leave. And then effort reward imbalance, roughly half of all women answered questions indicating that they felt like they had effort reward imbalance, 47.9% compared to only 38.7% of men. The one positive factor, the perceived likelihood of promotion, was associated with a lower likelihood of contemplating leaving, but that was true for men and not so much for women. Men who had high or intermediate scores on that factor were approximately 2.5 times less likely to contemplate leaving the profession. But there was no association between those items for women. So whatever benefit there might be from feeling like you have chances for promotion at work is mostly accruing to men and not so much to women. And Patrick and his co-author had speculated that might be because women might believe they have less opportunity for promotion, so they're just not factoring that in to whether they stay or not. So those are some of the high points of what the findings were. And along that last note, there was a 2019 study that showed that 53% of women indicated that they had been denied or overlooked for advancement or promotion, compared to only 7% of men. So that may be why, women aren't, more women may not be expecting promotion. So that might be why that doesn't really factor in their decision to stay or leave. And then I think we're going to shift over to our recommendations section, which was sort of the bulk of our paper and what we hope will be most useful for everyone, for law firms, for other employers, for lawyers, for law students. What you can either tell your employer they should be doing, if you're in management, what you can make your employer do, or if you're a lawyer trying to decide how to live your best life, what you can try to find in your employers.
Yeah, that's right, Jody. Thank you. As this working group discussed and continues to discuss, a lot of times these studies come out, but what happens with them? What do we do with them? And so the main focus of this working group was to put forward recommendations, tangible items and action points that can be taken to try to relieve some of the stress and change these statistics. So Jody, I do think I'm going back to you, and you're going to start off and talk to us about some of the recommendations under, I think, 2A1 and 2.
Sure. So one of the things we came up with were the recommendations for legal employers. Some of these things will sound more applicable to law firms, but they could be any type of employer, government, nonprofit, in-house, whatever the employer may be. So one of them is offering scaled or offering flexible employment practices. And that can be a variety of things. One of them is offering scaled hours to match scaled compensation. This used to be not done at all, but there has been more of an embrace of it over the last, I think, even 20 years, really. But the important part of having flexible hours requirements is having paths to leadership and partnership, even at those scaled hours structures. So all tracks should allow opportunities to participate in leadership in meaningful ways, whether it's firm committees, practice group leadership, and to work on interesting matters that are valued by the firm. Now, there may be, different tracks for whether you are heading for a partnership, equity partnership, senior counsel, or something else. But more importantly than whether you get called a partner or not is whether you get the opportunity to meaningfully participate in leadership of the firm and to be respected and to have work that is valued by the firm. Another flexible employment practice is to have transparent billable hours or even alternative methods of tracking and billing time. But understanding that most firms at least are going to maintain some sort of billable hour system, it's important to have honesty in billable hour requirements. So if the firm requires 1900, that should be a real 1900. Not, 1900 is the bare minimum. We really expect you to be billing 2200. So having honesty and transparency in billable hour requirements. Also, adopting better methods of valuing non-billable time, what you might call firm citizenship time, which often falls disproportionately on women and people of color. So, for example, women or people of color are often the ones tasked with staffing diversity committees and coming up with diversity policies and things like that. And that's wonderful, but they shouldn't then get dinged on their billable hours requirements because of that. So there should be some sort of recognition or credit for being good citizens of the firm and participating in these types of committees. It's also good, and I think a lot of firms do this, to give billable credit for a certain amount of pro bono hours. I think firms are fairly well aware that young attorneys in particular like to do pro bono work, in part because it makes you feel good, but also because it's an escape from some of the drudgery stuff that you're doing otherwise. So instead of just doing all document review, maybe you get to go represent an asylum seeker or something. And giving credit for a portion of pro bono work, a set number of hours a year or unlimited, however, whatever they want to do, but allowing folks to do some pro bono work benefits the lawyers and also the firm because the lawyers get good experience and they're happier. Permitting remote work, of course, is another flexible employment practice. And we all learned during the pandemic that, believe it or not, we could work outside of the office. As you can see behind me, I'm in my office. I tend to come in my office every day, partly because my commute's only about 12 minutes. But for a lot of people, being able to work from home has been just wonderful and liberating. It frees them of a long commute time. It gives them more time to spend with their family and their personal life because they don't have that commute time. And for people of color, it can sometimes be an escape from being in a majority white environment where they face microaggressions all the time. And so it can be a relief to be able to be home and comfortable while doing one's work instead of, being in an environment that, while nobody is intentionally trying to do you harm, can be tense for some folks. One of the things we focused on in terms of recommendations for employers is to focus on employee well-being, including providing opportunities for rest and regeneration and eliminating workplace toxicity. So one method that legal employers can use is to maintain a well-being committee with buy-in from leadership. These things, it's always important that it's not good enough to just start a committee. You have to have buy-in from the leadership, the management of your firm or your employer. And so that means give the committee authority to develop programs to improve well-being, provide tips on well-being, provide consultation on firm benefits, policies and practices that promote and affect well-being. Employers should adopt policies that promote well-being. Obviously, having good leave policies and a culture of encouraging use of leave is very important. Making it known that you can use your leave time for mental health needs with clear policies about requesting such leave. Communicating about well-being, leadership of the employer, the firm or the agency or whoever it is should stress the importance of employee well-being and communicate how to access the company's well-being and mental health resources. This is a big one. Respect employees' personal time. Folks in management, partners, general counsel, whoever it may be, should clearly communicate response time needs in emails, and they should specify deadlines and communicate when a response is not urgently needed. A funny thing happened to me yesterday. I tend to work late hours, and I find that I cannot often get through my email until after 5:30 when people stop emailing me, and then I can finally go through it all and respond. So I sent my team an email the other day and said, hey, by the way, I work late hours, but that does not mean if I email you that I expect you to respond in those late hours. You could, unless I say in the email, oh my God, it's an emergency, please respond now. That just because I email you at 9 o'clock at night doesn't mean I expect you to respond. And then just last night, a staff member, I had asked for something and it was like 5:30 and she said, okay, I'll work on this tonight and I'll get it to you in the morning. And I was like, no, you don't need to do that. Just tomorrow, anytime is fine. You don't need to work tonight. And she's also a person that is hourly. So I'm like, you don't have to work overtime to do this. But it's important to communicate deadline needs to people when you're telling them something that you need to have done. Folks that are giving out assignments or dealing with clients should consult with the affected persons before setting and agreeing to deadlines. So if you're the partner and you're talking to the client, before you say, of course we can do that by tomorrow at 9 a.m., make sure, check in with the people who are actually going to be doing that work and make sure that it's doable. Another policy, I don't know anybody who's actually got this in place, but I have heard of it, maybe a unicorn, is designate one day a week as a meeting-free or Zoom-free day, which I'm finding since I recently promoted to a position overseeing a section of the Attorney General's office statewide, and I'm just in nonstop meetings now. So that would be wonderful if there was a day that was no meetings. And then, of course, employers should adopt zero tolerance policies towards discrimination, harassment, retaliation, bullying, etc., and clearly communicate the process for reporting any concerns in those areas and for resolving problems that may arise. And then the final suggestion we have in terms of focusing on employee well-being is to review the mental health resources that the firm or the agency offers to ensure they meet the needs of employees. Those could be things like, I think a lot of companies now use EAP, employee assistance programs, which give a set number of free mental health sessions, and then can build into longer relationships under health insurance, but making sure that you have adequate resources to meet the mental health needs of your people. And some companies do other things too, like having resources to help with financial needs, or dealing with debt or college admissions processes, various things. But you see what kind of resources you offer and what other resources might be out there that you could offer, or at least provide information about so that people could easily access. And then I think we are going to go to Judith for the next section.
I actually think Kati might start this one, and then Judith, if she wants to chime in, can do that. And then we did also receive some questions in advance from the registrants. So as those questions fit in, I will pose those to our speakers. And then if there are some leftovers at the end, we'll get to those then. Kati, take it away.
Sure. So I'm really honored to be here with you guys. I want to thank California Lawyers Association for having me on this committee. It means a lot to me. I really respect Patrick's work, and Bree, of course, was really good at getting me and Jody to write well, and she filled in the blanks way more than anyway. So thank you, Bree. And so I want to talk about recommendations for employers 3 and 4. Number 3 being enhanced attention to leadership training and professional development. I want to start off by saying the focal point of all of this work for me is about the greater picture of humanity. and what's good for the collective whole. Okay, it is focused on women and lawyers, but really gender equality via gender equity is what this encompasses for me, because we all flourish when everyone flourishes, right? And that's really important to keep in mind. These days, for instance, there's a focus on technology, AI, and where it all fits in, and we hear more and more about it. But really, Gandhi said this years ago when he came out with his 7 somethings, I forgot the name of it. And one of it was, how does science fit in with humanity? And it's not just about science. Science today would be technology, but it's really, his comment was, what's for the greater good? And so that's what we're looking at. What allows for everyone to be a contribution to society and flourish? And that was incredibly important for me. So looking at professional development and leadership training, the question to really ask, or to what to look at, is what's the behavior at the top really promoting? And are they creating a culture of wellness that will shape the employee perceptions? You've all sat in those shoes. I know I have in all of my legal, whether I was in-house at the federal government or at a law firm. Can I say that? What's going on? How are people setting the trend for that? And if you're someone who has any say or sway for the organization, it's really important for you to really put in a strong impact for those members' experiences. So we all are comfortable saying, you know, I didn't feel well. I had a little bit of anxiety this morning. You know, you hear that more and more. And when I go into firms and I train on this, I'm like, you know, it's okay to say that, because you'll find that there's a whole lot of people who want to say something like that, but or don't know how to say it, or are wondering whether they should say it or not. So it's really very important for it to not be taboo, because once it becomes taboo, and, you know, junior associates, I just remember being at the firm, it was like, okay, you don't say that, don't do that. They'll flag you, they'll tag you, whatever, and then you won't get business. But that's leaving behind our humanity, correct? And that we're human, and that we have rough days, and sometimes it turns into anxiety, sometimes they can turn to depression, and sometimes reach for alcohol and other ways to cope so that we don't lose our job and our footing on the door. So we looked at and recommended providing some kind of training for leadership and for the supervisor personnel, not just the lawyers, but for other people, focused on empathetic communication. And, you know, I define communication when I come into law firms as it's twofold: really speaking directly and honestly, but really then also having that empathy and being able to put yourself in other people's shoes. Because if you don't have those two things, then it's just brash communication oftentimes. So this style of communication is incredibly important, but forget that it's just the communication aspect that's tremendously important. I think as lawyers, we think we're really good communicators and we're busy, so things get lost. And when things get lost in the shuffle, miscommunication is at the core, and that leads to people's anxieties because they're stressed out and wondering if they're doing it well because there is no dialogue. So really, it's about creating that culture where people can show up and be able to feel and receive empathy. The F word, feelings, is oftentimes what I work around because people think they need to leave all that at home. We also recommended that there'd be attention given and real nurturing to what's the leadership capacity of women lawyers and lawyers of color. This is about empowering women or women, people of color, or whoever is not being seen in the true light that they belong in. And really what I call the hallmark of this is this: there should be no fear that people in charge feel like, no, we can't empower them because there'll be a coup and they'll take us over. It really won't harm others. You know, what's good for this group is good for the collective. And we have to remember that it'll strengthen the collective. And I know some great people in charge at law firms that really relish that and see that, and they're not afraid of being ousted because they're comfortable with who they are and their skill set. And it's not something that's going to harm them, but make them look better, okay? The other thing in this area to really think about is the distinction of who we are as the genders. Okay, if we're talking about not non-binary, but female versus men. And I attribute this to Alison Armstrong. I always give attribution where it's due. Alison Armstrong did some brilliant research in this men versus women. And she found that women are gatherers and men are hunters. Back in the day, there was one deer and men were hunting it. So they had single focused vision, right? They were all hunting one deer to feed their family, while the women were in the meadows with one another gathering the berries. So that left us with diffused awareness as female. And when you look at that characteristic, it's very good for leadership to have diffused awareness versus single focus. Single focus people do well on doing the tasks that the leader who sees what's coming employs out. So it's something to consider that it's just using people's capacity better. It's just wiring. It's nothing good or bad. It's just different. And are you using people to their strengths for the good of the entire firm? And also remembering that empathy and EQ, which is really what's covered there, are not soft skills. I really do dislike that term because it's giving short shrift to the qualities that we all have as humans and that we bring to a work setting that either lets us thrive and whole or holds us back tremendously. And the next recommendation we had here is providing gender inclusive leadership trainings. And like I said earlier, focusing on those traits that what makes a good leader. Well, if it's diffused awareness, it's just women are naturally made that way, not dissing anybody else. It's just a focal point that what do you want out of this process? Something strong. And then finally, providing career or executive coaching. As a coach and a consultant, I see it a certain way, right? And I think, for instance, Judith does too. But it's really about making people feel valued for their inherent worth as whatever they are, as women, as minorities. And when I come in and I start the coaching process, I say, can you put everyone in a room? If I never get to touch them, at least I can say this part of it. And I always say, these people paid me to be here. And it's not to pat me on the back, but it's to say you matter. And I mean, over the years, I wish I could have recorded how everybody's eyes just lights up. They all sit up a little straighter. And even if they're not even paying attention to me or engaged, they're like, somebody paid you to be here because they care about me as a human being. And the morale just shifts automatically. If that's all I do in that session, it's made a difference, right? So you really should keep that in mind. And it's not just lip service, of course, we're looking at. And the next recommendation we had was about really promoting connection, right? And sense of true belonging. So, with the diversity language, it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or at least that's what I used when I was chair at the ABA Law Practice Division. I also then chaired diversity, and I added the B at the end of it because belonging really allows people to feel connected to one another, and connection reduces our stress levels. And if you want to know more about that, I did formal research on stress and self-confidence. I'm happy to share that with you. You just ask for it, the summary report. And then when you lower your stress, you lower your attrition, right? Because you have a place that you can call home at work. And we're looking at promoting connection at work with your colleagues and with your legal community. So we recommended at work having formal or informal development plans in place for that connection to happen, which could include mentoring, which could include check-ins, just simple check-ins, which a lot of employers say, I love all these things, but are you being a little Pollyanna? We don't have time for this. Well, you only make time for things you prioritize and find important. And if you, heaven forbid, have a bunch of associates or lawyers that are dead on the ground, I know I'm being a little dramatic, but really, I've worked in all those settings. There are some times where there was just nothing left to give, right? Then what are you going to prioritize now? The work's never going to get done. So it's important to have check-ins, even if it's, we're not asking for the world, just for you to you really put this on the calendar and really look at it. And discussion of what opportunities are there in the future? What plans are there? That's the number one thing I hear from lawyers saying, no one ever asks me what I want to do. And I'm like, well, why don't you go and say, I want to set up a check-in and talk about my future? When people don't see a future for themselves, it's very bleak and there's no reason to get up in the morning, truly. Okay. Connection to colleagues. We're really looking at some kind of an intentional network within the firm where it's about really mutuality and people get to find that organized support. Mentorship programs is what a lot of people ask for, but here's my take on that. I see a lot of calls for mentorship programs, and I would question this. And so think about this, please. If I am a woman lawyer, senior woman lawyer, and I'm already stressed, right? Patrick and Bree have spoken to that, right? And the numbers are there. And now you're saddling me with being somebody's mentor. So now I'm feeling like a fraud, right? Oh my gosh. And I'm now mad because I can't say it. Oh, sure, I'd love to mentor you, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have anything to give. And my stress is even higher. So I recommend lawyers and law firms start off with some other aspect of this, which was in question, one of the questions, I kind of want to answer that this way, that why don't we start looking inward at who we are? And that's what my programs are about. That's why I'm here on this committee, that the person is important. And if we can identify the traits and the attributes, the brand of the person, whatever the heck you want to call it, then I feel good about myself. I know what my strengths are. I know what I'm good at. I know how I can come out and across and message myself. And then I'm in a position where, frankly, I just hand you the mentorship. You don't need the mentorship program, me to do anything. You just can implement it yourself. But now I'm in a place where I can say, I know myself. I'm good with myself. Not only does that serve the diversity model, but at that point, you can just say, I am now ready to share who I am with somebody else and let them grow in that light for themselves. And that is incredibly important to healthy connections. And of course, we encouraged participation in the legal community, right? The bars that we already talked about. And being a part of it, no matter how much time you can give it. The ABA is a great route. I'm a member of that. I'm in the DC bar, of course, I'm here participating, because it makes us feel like we belong, and there's nothing that beats that. And then, of course, lastly, being able to provide information about where people can go for support that takes out that taboo nature of it, that, well, no one's mentioning it. That must mean everybody else has got their ducks in a row and I'm the only failure here. But the more we talk about it and we say, you know, it's just normal. I mean, it's like the term counseling. When you say somebody's in counseling, people, you know, still this day, people are like, oh, and I'm like, healthy people have therapists and counselors so they don't get sick. And that's my view on it anyway. So I think that covers 3 and 4 on my end. And now I'm going to turn it back to Sarah.
Yes, Kathy, do you mind if I throw out a couple of questions that came in advance from the registrants that I think fit under these categories that you've just discussed?
Sure, go
I
ahead.
can do that. Sure. So one of them was how to make informed decisions about career paths at different stages of your life or career. Any discussion on that?
So I think the focus really has to be, like I said, on you. Most of us have a tendency as humans to look outward. Well, what's that company offering? What's that law firm offering? Instead, start here. And, you know, this is a much more difficult place to start, right? It's having to look inward and looking at yourself and who you are and what you want to do next. I call my career an odyssey because I'm always doing that. I'm like, yeah, I think I need to do this with my career next. If you look at my resume, you'll see that. But I think it's really important to start with you first, then go out and reach out and talk to people in different practice areas. And as we always say, we mentioned in the report, we highlighted, is employee well-being being prioritized? If you're here, it's because it's important to you. And that's a question you really need to ask after you figure out what's important to you first on top of well-being. Judith, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I do with all of my students and the attorneys that I work with is a values identification, because finding that intersection between what matters to you most and the work you're doing has a huge impact on your long-term satisfaction in your career. I have literally seen lawyers shift the focus of their practice based on the results of their values identification because they had aligned their work with what matters to them most. And there's wonderful research out there. There's a report by Sheldon and Krieger. I think it's Lawrence Krieger. And if somebody can tell me Sheldon's first name, I always forget. A great report that identified that the disconnect, when there's a disconnect between our values, that is who we are and what matters to us most, and the work we're doing, there's a decline in well-being. And what actually got me into this work was that I went through that myself when I was practicing. and realized that I had that disconnect between values and work. And I thought it was only me. And so, I made some changes. And then when I found out that this is actually an issue in the profession, I started to talk about it more. So I would highly recommend both to law students and to lawyers, think about why you went to law school. What were the drivers? What brought you to this profession? And find that niche that aligns with what matters to you, because law schools are not great at encouraging students to go into areas that are non-traditional. But a non-traditional area may be ideal for you, and that could be government, or it could be social justice, or it could be solo practice, entrepreneurship. There are a lot of different ways to go, and law school career centers don't focus on that. And I've worked with many, many lawyers and students who have found that they needed to make that shift. And so doing a values of identification, what are the skills that you have? What are you good at? Where is there a need in the profession? And what brings you joy and satisfaction? And that intersection is your ideal practice. And it's there. I think there is a place in the law for everyone. So just identifying where that is.
I'm sorry. I would just add on to that if that sounds a little overwhelming to identify your values and everything, you can even break it down simpler. 16 years ago, I was a partner in a firm, and I was citing, I wanted to make a change. I wasn't sure what. I took out a legal pad and I literally wrote things I could do and started making a list of things I could do. And once I started that, I realized, oh, there's a lot of different options. And I could, say I could go into academia. I could go to a different law firm. I could go into government. What types of government? Do I want to be a DA? No, not really. Do I want to do this? Oh, the Attorney General's office is like a law firm, but it's government. And when you can break it down really simply and let yourself be open to all the options that you have. And I don't mean that to sound Pollyanna-ish, but it's just a helpful exercise because you can get trapped in a place where you're unhappy and you feel like there's nothing else out of there. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. If I went somewhere else, it would just be more of the same. And you can get trapped in that feeling of despair or being, ground down. And you have to sometimes just sit down with a legal pad and say, what other things could I do? And let the, world open to you and explore them and tick them off, whether they're worth pursuing or not.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, another way to do that is to make a list of what are the qualities that you want your next position to have. So when I was making a shift, I didn't know exactly what that would be, but I knew that I wanted greater flexibility. I wanted direct engagement. I was tired of being behind a monitor all the time. I wanted, I don't know, there were 4 or 5 things. And when it showed up, it was clear what the correct move was. So, and I would also suggest speaking to, being careful about who you speak to and who you ask for advice. But if you do engage with someone, having them help you identify what matters to you most, not what they think you should do, but what are your skills? What are your values? What is interesting to you? What lights you up? And so focusing on that. The other comment I wanted to make, and then I'm going to end with this, there's so much to say, but well-being is subjective. Well-being is not a formula that is the same across the board. So understanding what well-being means to you, identifying that, what are your needs, what keeps you healthy and well, whether the work processes, I think understanding how humans work, we're not designed to work 12 hours straight without a break and drinking water and taking a walk. So figuring out what helps with your subjective well-being and then communicating that so that accommodations, if necessary, can be made. Because I think that for most of us, we can figure out how to work our schedules and our needs, how to work those out. But if you need something else, figure out what that is, communicate that. And if you need help doing that, reach out to a member of this committee. You know, we are here to help. I want to actually commend Bree and Kati and Jody because they did the actual writing of the report. And the reason I'm joining is I was on the working group, but the reality is that these suggestions that have been made are really doable. They're actionable. But if you need more than that, we're available to help with that.
Thank you, Judith. There was one other question that fits under these recommendations that Kathy, you did touch upon, and I just want to make sure there's no other comments either from you or others. Someone asked, you know, for us to discuss the barriers for women post law school and entering the field and lack of leadership and mentorship from fellow women lawyers. So I don't know if anybody else wants to touch on that, anything else to add, but wanted to throw that out there.
I just wanted to finish that answer by saying, instead of starting with mentorship, start with fellowship and introspection of really looking. Everything that Jody and Judith and I said has to start with, what do you want? What are your values? It's always coming back to shine the light here. And people say, I'm too busy. So it's not that there's lack, but of leadership. It's leadership can only come after I feel well enough to lead others. And it's a progression of events to become a good leader. And wellness, we've certainly seen unwell leaders, right? Though tyranny, that's what I call that, right? And oppression is the result of that. And so I think that's really important to look at.
Thank you. All right. I think, Patrick, you're up. We're going to discuss the recommendation 2A5.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Just sort of back out and talk about that recommendation. Strategies for accountability is essentially what that recommendation is. But why is that important, right? So we're hearing a lot of really good ideas and suggestions, and the report contains a lot of useful and actionable suggestions. And people could really be, you know, in their mind committed to this idea of creating culture change within their workplace, fostering a sense of improved well-being, and sort of doing the right thing. But the reality is that this is a legal profession, right? People are practicing law. And so the idea of well-being being a true priority, I mean, it's getting there. We're making progress, but it's always going to be secondary, tertiary. I mean, it's not ever going to be in front of the client's demands or the client's, you know, needs, servicing the client, whatever it may be, and whoever the client may be, depending on your different work context. And so I guess where I'm going with that is that, you know, recognizing that as well-intentioned as we may be, all of us, and anyone doing this work or interested in this work may be, there are realities of legal practice that are always going to be antagonistic to making progress and creating sustainable change in any work environment as it relates to well-being. So you need some accountability, right? You need some mechanisms in place that are going to ensure that you're taking steps to reach your goals, because simply having the goal is ultimately going to be insufficient and won't lead to the type of cultural change that we're all hoping to see. You know, I can think of my own experience in my work now as a consultant, as an advisor to law firms. I can think of firms that I've been working with for years who started off in a very similar place, a very similar position in terms of their buy-in from leadership, in terms of their enthusiasm for the goal, in terms of their ostensible commitment to making progress. And then as the years have progressed, those firms are no longer similarly situated. You know, I'm thinking of one in particular that's made incredible progress, and they really have done a lot to improve their culture. And another firm that started off with that same level of sort of fire in the belly, right? We're going to sign the ABA Wellbeing Pledge, and we're going to make things better for our lawyers. Their well-being efforts really have amounted to almost nothing tangible because they didn't have those mechanisms for accountability. And so, what are some things that, you know, an employer can do on a very practical level, or any sort of work environment can do on a very practical level? One thing you could do is sort of take the pulse, take the temperature of your workforce on a regular basis, whether that's conducting, you know, needs assessments, asking your people what they need, whether it's conducting surveys periodically to just gauge what's the internal stress level. Otherwise, staying attuned to what's happening with your people. there can be a reluctance to do that. I hear that from employers all the time because they don't want to ask questions that they're not necessarily prepared to hear the answer for, or they don't want to create an expectation that they will necessarily be responsive to what that survey yields, right? And I think that's understandable. Nonetheless, it is important, right? Because again, if you just have this goal that we're going to create these different terms or these different, we're going to change the culture to create a better environment, but you don't have built-in accountability, you won't ever reach that point. Signing the ABA while being pledged, we're at 212 signatories, maybe 210 signatories here in April of 2023. That number has declined from originally we had about 230, 235 at our peak. The reason why that number has declined is because there's an annual recommitment process. We're going through that process again right now. I'm part of that pledge committee where firms are, or employers, I should broaden it out because it really is all legal employers. They're asked, what have you done over the last 12 months to demonstrate essentially compliance with the 7 steps of the pledge framework? And employers who really didn't do anything, maybe they signed on to the pledge because they had good intentions. Maybe they signed on to the pledge as a sort of PR move or whatever reason, but they didn't do anything. They were stricken from the list, right? And so we were very intentional when we rolled out that pledge almost 5 years ago now, that there had to be that mechanism for accountability. So, if you're a part of a firm or a government agency, an in-house department, or people who are, and they're not signatories to the ABA while being pledged, I would encourage them to do that because it does at least provide that sort of infrastructure that your organization will be externally accountable to. You can, seek feedback in exit interviews, stay interviews, whatever it may be, progression or evaluation processes. There are a lot of different touch points in any different work environment where you can, if you want to and are willing to, solicit or glean feedback that will help you, stay on track. Another quick point that I'll make, and then we can move on in terms of creating those mechanisms for accountability, is to create sort of a timeline, a schedule of deliverables, if you will, right? So we know an overarching recommendation is that any firm or employer that is seeking to improve well-being, to make some of the changes that are outlined in this report, having a committee, right? Making it someone's responsibility, making it their domain is really essential. But beyond that, creating a schedule, right? We're going to, over the next 18 months, aspire to and try to do these things at these different intervals. And even having that level of structure can be really helpful because then the person or the committee who's responsible for trying to shepherd this program or these efforts towards success can refer to that document and say, okay, it's 3 months, are we making any progress? And maybe they haven't been, but it really is, it's essential. The sort of entrenched nature of many of these issues that we're trying to overcome, the inertia that often exists. These are things that need a plan, right? If you're going to successfully overcome them, you need a plan. Just because we're really trying to talk about changing some very, very entrenched behaviors, and there's always that stress coming from, putting the client first.
You, Patrick. And Bree, you're going to tackle section 3 from
Absolutely.
the report recommendation. Thank you.
And I'll be quick because a lot of the things we've kind of already talked about, and I want us to get into the questions. But the third section of the recommendations was really for people who are job seekers themselves, either law students or people that are lateral hires. And the first recommendation we talked about there is, number 1, educate yourself about the well-being crisis, the behavioral health crisis that is existing in the legal profession, and the fact that there is such a disproportionate rate of these issues. Some of the important things, one thing to know is that across your career, you're going to run into people who are experiencing these problems. It is so prevalent. The other side of that is that at some point you may as well experience some of these things. And I know from teaching law school and working with a lot of young lawyers that it's common to, just because it is so common in the populace, to have some of these issues yourself. We're seeing as the cohort of students coming up from high school to college and now into law school, the rates of these issues that they're experiencing is so much higher. And so among those people that have this history in their background, and that's something that I have myself. And so I really can kind of stand in that space and talk about it a little bit. But I think it is incredibly important to be aware that this is sort of a hazardous space that you're stepping into in the legal profession for behavioral health. And if you have these issues, depression, substance use disorders, et cetera, in your background, it's really incredibly important to pay attention to your self-care, to really have your game on in that regard. And it's something that you have to look at from law school to your early days throughout the course of your career. And so I wanted to put that out there. It's really important. It is not, if you have a history of depression, it does not mean that you can't be a lawyer, that you can't be a great lawyer, but it does mean you do have to pay attention. So I just wanted to put that out there for a second. In regards to some other tips and looking, the ABA pledge, you can just Google the ABA Wellbeing Pledge and you can see the list of firms. So if you're shopping for a new place, check and see if your prospective employer is on that list. Another thing that has come to the fore in the past few years is now Vault has rankings on law firms for wellness. So you can go in and see where your prospective firm or your current firm is listed. So there's just a couple of other tips to give prospective job searchers, and then time to move over to the questions.
All right, thank you, Bree. We do have a couple of questions remaining that were given to us in advance that I'm just going to open up to the panel. One is, what is the best way to proactively address your mental health boundaries and limitations with a supervisor? Anyone want Jody?
Yeah, I'll take that or give it a stab. One thing is, the most important thing is we have to be honest and open, and it's very daunting to reach out. But when we are struggling, we need to, hopefully we have a supervisor who you have a decent enough relationship with that you can communicate. But when we communicate, it's good to explain where you're coming from and also put it in the context so that they understand how it impacts them and for you to understand how it impacts them. So saying, look, I'm overwhelmed right now. Here are some things going on, and I'm not able to do my best work right now. And so I need to figure out how I can do my best work and address these other issues. And, whether that means, can we hold off giving me some new assignments for a bit while I kind of get caught up, or whether that means I'm going to need to take some time off to deal with these family issues or elder care issues or something going on in my life. But going to your employer honestly, and also with as many solutions as you can, showing how the employer will benefit from you being able to do your best work. So you have to kind of, we all want what's best for us, but you have to understand that to persuade people to do what you want them to do, you also have to make it seem like it's a good idea for them. And so showing them why it's important for you to have the support you need, or to have this accommodation, or just this, whatever it is you're looking for, you're more likely to get a result you want if you look at it from their perspective too, and see what the best, best suggestion is. And the thing that you don't want to do is to keep putting it off and not ask for the help. I actually had that happen with an attorney of mine last year who was going through some struggles, and he didn't tell me or his supervisor, and he ended up blowing deadlines, and we didn't find out about it until we got the motions for sanctions and saw them in the mail. And then things were just a mess. And at the sanctions hearing, the judge said, look, I feel really bad that you were going through these issues, but what I can't sanction, or what I can't, countenance, is that you didn't reach out to your supervisor. and he got sanctioned, and the judge was saying, I feel for you that you were having these issues going on, but you needed to reach out to your supervisors and you didn't tell them, and they could have helped you, and it could have saved, this battle with the other side and getting sanctioned over not responding to these motions and blowing deadlines. So when you're talking to your supervisor, it's also sort of, you can remind them of that too. Like I'm letting you know because it's important that you understand what I can do right now and what I want to do and how I can work at my best capability for you and with you. So anyway, hopefully that provides some guidance.
Yes, thank you, Jody. Did anyone else want to add to that?
I would add to that this is where the importance of leadership development comes in, because I've worked with partners who've told me that they've had associates curled up in a ball on the floor crying in their office, and they didn't know how to deal with it. And so training, we need to know how to communicate to our supervisors what we're going through, and our supervising attorneys need training on how to respond, how to deal with it, who to contact, how to maintain confidentiality if that's necessary. Sometimes it's just a matter of, I have too much work, I'm going to miss a deadline, like Jody pointed out, and that can be easily fixed. But sometimes it's more serious than that. And so leadership development at law firms is essential. And we're not trained in law school. Nothing in legal education teaches us how to interact with other human beings. They're very good at teaching us analytical thinking, great cognitive skill, not a great life skill, right? So we need more leadership development in across the board.
Thank you, Judith. Okay, we've got one more question that was posed in advance. In what ways can individuals who might be male, who are part of the lives of female attorneys, support them? I think, Bree, you had some comments on that one.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in here, it made me think and reflect about my career. I've been a lawyer for 32 years, and until I began to work with Patrick, I had never had a male lawyer, and I've met thousands in 32 years say, is there anything I can do to support you or to help you? Not once. And I bet there's a lot of women out there that have had that first experience. So just simply asking, what can I do to support you in your career? Mind-blowing, amazing. And also that, for the woman that's being asked, you care, you've noticed, I must be important enough, valuable enough for you to take the time to do that. That's amazing. And so ask, then also dig deep and be thinking about, how can I help this person build a book of business, et cetera? How can I introduce them maybe to prospective clients? Anything I can do to help give them a leg up at any part of the career path would be wonderful. But I think the most astonishing thing maybe about that question is just how infrequent thought is even given to that. So whoever asked that, thank you.
Thank you, Bree. And we do have a question posed in the Q&A. This is the changes you talk about, Cassie, which is empathetic communication, overcoming fear of empowering others, etc., sometimes need to occur with individuals in power who just aren't identifying that there is a problem or frankly lack empathy, lack ability to see that times have changed. How do we make it so that attention to these issues are attractive to those who are in power who don't really have an incentive to change? Ways to quantify the benefit. Employee turnover should be compelling enough, but I wonder.
That's an excellent question. And the answer really lies in what Jody said. You have to not just spin it. Look, we're not spin doctors over here. We're really saying you practice the empathy and the compassion. Put yourself in that person's shoes that you're saying is lacking the empathy. And see it from their perspective, as difficult as it may be, but it's a very good muscle to practice. And think to yourself, what's important to this person? I had a certain person of a certain orientation say to me once at the ABA when I was chair, This person said, "Are you trying to get rid of all people that look like me?" And this person was in the majority, so it was a very like strange comment, let's put it this way. But I stepped back immediately. I first got really angry, like I can tell is like they're not listening. I'm not trying to get rid of you. I'm trying to be more inclusive to include other people. And I saw fear in this person's eyes, fear of being forgotten. And I said, "Oh no, I would never leave anybody out. We want more of your voice. You matter, you're important." And I meant it. And you could immediately see this person, the 6-year-old was like, "Okay, I'm safe. No one's going to get rid of me." So that's generally at the heart of these issues. It's not that they're lacking the ability to see that times have changed. Consider perhaps a reframe that they don't have the self-awareness because they're afraid to exercise those muscles. So while employee turnover is compelling, they are still thinking, well, all right, fine, I'll take my chances. And when I get there, then I'll put some sweat equity in. And I know all the statistics on how much it costs to rehire and retrain, but I don't have time to focus. So maybe make it about time for them. Ask them what's important to you here. If it's just money, how can you put this in terms of money? And the last comment I have on this is we don't all have to change anybody else. In fact, it's impossible to change other people. I lived a lifetime in law firms and in a toxic in-house environment where that was my thought, if I could just get this person to see this. So it's what Gandhi said. I don't know why I'm referencing Gandhi so much today. I haven't ever referenced Gandhi, but change begins with us. Be the change you want to see. So if you just show up mirroring that way of being that you want that person in charge to be, maybe it's more open, more inclusive, kinder, really, right? Kindness does belong in law firm practice. You'll see that that person this is behavioral psychology, must shift to accommodate your shift in being and energy. It's just a must. It's a given. It's science. So put you totally in control and you don't feel so helpless in those situations, which is what I often hear. I hope that helps. And I've got a lot more to say about that. So whoever said this, please, I'm happy to talk to you offline.
Thank you, Patty. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other posed questions either from today or previously submitted. I don't know if anybody has any final comments that they would like to make from the panel during the discussion. We might be finishing up. Looks like it. Well, this was amazing, wonderful. I knew it would be. Thank you everyone for joining us. Again, thank you to our panel members, the working group, California Women Lawyers. I'd like to give a special thank you to Lauren Oakley from CLA, who is definitely the glue. We would not be here without her putting this together. So thank you, Lauren. Obviously, this is an ongoing discussion that we will continue to, keep at the forefront and address. And I think as everybody has pointed out on this call, if you've got any interest in follow-up questions or, resources, or would like, to have a one-off with any of us, feel free to email us, get in contact with us, and I'm sure all of us would be happy to engage with you. So have a nice evening, everyone, and take care, and let's focus on that well-being. Thank you all.
Thank you.